This is a Black Nouveau web exclusive.
Tell me everything that happened. The first time I visited death row, I wasn't expecting to meet somebody the same age as me.
These are scenes from the upcoming film Just Mercy. It's about social justice advocate Bryan Stevenson. James Causey interviewed him when he spoke at the MATC downtown campus.
I want us to change the world. I want us to create a different America. I want us to create a different justice system.
Bryan Stevenson believes that we need something big to change the criminal justice system. In 1972, there were 300,000 people in jails and prisons. Today, that number has increased by 2 million. And a disproportionate number are people of color. In his book, Just Mercy, he chronicles how brutality, unfairness, and racial bias continues to infect criminal laws in the United States.
For decades, we built on this idea of white supremacy. For decades, we told black people, you're not good enough to vote just because you're black. We said to black people, you can't go to school with the rest of us just because you're black. We said to people who came to this community, you can't have a job in this building or that plant and that space because you're black. We humiliated people of color every day for decades. My parents were humiliated every day of their lives. Those signs that said white and colored weren't directions, they were assaults. And we haven't dealt with those injuries, and because of that, we are still now burdened with this presumption of dangerousness and guilt. Black and brown people in America are burdened by this presumption of dangerousness and guilt. And even though I'm at this college, I have to tell all the college students and all the high school students here, don't be deceived. Don't think your education can shield you from a presumption of dangerousness and guilt. I'm in my 50s. I've been practicing law for 30 years. I've been to the court a bunch of times. And I'm still presumed dangerous and guilty. I was sitting in a courtroom just a couple of years ago in the Midwest, not the South, the Midwest. I was in court for the first time. I had my suit on, I had my shirt and tie on, was at defense counsel's table. I was there early. And the judge walked in and he saw me sitting at defense counsel's table and he said, hey, you get back out there in the hallway and you wait until your defense lawyer gets here. I don't want any defendant sitting in my courtroom without their lawyer. And I stood up and I said, well, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Bryan Stevenson, I am the lawyer. And the judge started laughing, and the prosecutor started laughing, and I made myself laugh because I didn't want to disadvantage my client. Client came in, a young white kid I was representing. We did the hearing, and afterward I was thinking to myself, what is it that when this judge saw a middle-aged black man in a suit and tie at defense counsel's table, it didn't even occur to him that that's the lawyer. What that is this narrative of racial difference that we have got to change.
There's a lot of talk about reforming the criminal justice system, but how do you do that without being perceived as not being soft on crime?
I think, first of all, we've got to redefine what the relationship to crime should be. I think we should be smart on crime. I think we should be sensible about crime. I think our commitment should be to keep communities safe, to try to promise people that we can do everything we can to keep them from being murdered and raped and robbed. Right now, the philosophy is we say to people, after you've been murdered, after you've been raped, after you've been robbed, we're going to really be tough. We're really going to beat up on that offender. And that's a very misguided relationship to the whole question of crime. Most of the people we have in jails and prisons are there for drug crimes, for property crimes, for crimes that actually don't directly threaten public safety. And there is no hard or soft there. There's just smart or not smart. You know, is it smart to spend $30,000 a year to put somebody in prison for 30 years for writing a bad check for $30? Is that really smart? Is that sensible? Is that wasteful? Is that misguided? And those are the kinds of questions that I think are triggered by the reform issues that I'm trying to advocate. And I do think we have to think differently about violent crime as well. A lot of people are in jails and prisons for violence that is, again, a manifestation of mental illness, which I think we should be treating. We've got too many children in our community, in Milwaukee and other communities across this nation, that are born into violent families. They live in violent neighborhoods, they go to violent schools, and by the time they're 4 and 5, they have been traumatized by violence. And they are desperate to be safe. And we're not providing them safety. We're not giving them counseling. We're not helping them. We're sending them to schools, and we're threatening them, which just aggravates their trauma. So by the time they're 7 and 8, when they are looking for a moment to be relieved from this stress, this overwhelming anxiety, and they start using drugs, we fault them, we condemn them, we say they're bad, when in fact I believe we are responsible for not helping these children cope with that trauma. when they're so frightened all the time, when they're just looking for safety and they make a choice to join a gang, we think that means that they're evil or destructive. I think it just means that they are doing anything they can to cope with this overwhelming fear. And so that narrative has to shift before we can actually do the kinds of things we needed to do. There was a time when if you were a black man or a white woman and you said you were in love with someone of a different race, you would get put in a mental institution. If you said, I'm a woman and I'm in love with another woman, I'm homosexual, you would be put in a mental institution. We had a frame for characterizing those choices, those behaviors that needed to shift. Now I think we recognize that that would be completely inappropriate. That's part of what has to happen in some of our criminal justice system. We think that drug dependency and drug addiction is a crime issue. It's really a health issue. For alcoholism, if someone said, oh, I know that person's an alcoholic and I see them going into a bar, we wouldn't think, let's call the police. We see that alcoholism is a health issue. And we've made that shift. I think we need to make that shift on a lot of the issues that we're dealing with in our current criminal justice system.
We incarcerate more black men in Wisconsin on a percentage basis than any other state. What makes Wisconsin ground zero for black male incarceration?
Well, I think, Wisconsin is one of those states that hasn't really seriously challenged itself around racial inequality, around the implicit bias, around the presumption of dangerousness and guilt. There's not that same legacy of slavery and Jim Crow, and we think that we're not implicated when these questions of race arise. And every place in America is burdened by this history of racial injustice. We are all infected by that narrative of racial difference. And states like Wisconsin have to wake up to that, have to do the hard work that is necessary. We need truth and reconciliation in Wisconsin just like we need it in Mississippi. And when we engage in that, when we commit to that, we realize that we can't tolerate the kinds of disparities that we now see in the Wisconsin criminal justice system. We can fix it, we can do better, but it's going to require a commitment, an engagement, and an acknowledgement that we have a problem that has to be fixed.